Okay, so welcome to the costume workshop. Unfortunately, our recording fell through, so we weren't able to do it on the day. So I'm re-recording this after the fact, and I'll do my best to paraphrase what was said by the guest speakers. Um, Thank you for attending our 2026 costume workshop online. I really hope you guys enjoy it. Um, my name is Evelyn, so I'm usually at the back of the workshops, either recording or I'll avoid public speaking as much as possible. So I will be reading off the page at you today. I have been a co-director of the Hoedown since 2022. And while I'm generally running the website, set design, and other various logistics each year with Hayden and Desney, my actual background is in costume. I've studied both fashion and costume design, and I'm currently freelancing in the film industry while finishing off some prior studies. I do have some experience and qualifications in certain crafts, but some of you watching this will almost certainly have skills and knowledge that I don't, which is why I also have some extremely knowledgeable people getting up to talk, is what happened on the day. So I'll do my best. I'm by no means an expert on everything under the costume umbrella, but the aim of this workshop is that everyone leaves the session feeling inspired and hopefully with a bit of direction on how to have some really cool outfits to show off in November. So I'll go into the design process first. So there is actually a bit of a process to making any project, whether you realize that you are doing it or not. It might not be in this order, but breaking it down like this will turn it into small hills rather than a mountain of work. I would usually start with breaking down the character brief and getting to know the character that I'll be bringing to life. Then I would go into the very important research phase, which is where I gather as much reference material as I can possibly consume. Can't stress enough how important this is, and it will always show in your final piece how much effort you put into the research. I would then work on having a final concept that I can then use as a blueprint for the next however many days, weeks, or months I have before it's needed. And I find having this really helps me stop straying or getting sort of distracted by a million other different things I could add or do to it. So if I've got that, it kind of sets out my plan. After that, I would then do technical planning, which is where I plan out how I will actually make my concept into a reality, what materials I'll need, construction methods I might need to understand before I cut into anything. This will save you a lot of really expensive mistakes. After I've done all that work leading up to step 5, only then will I actually sit in front of a sewing machine and construct what I have designed. After that, any finishing touches that will make it feel less like a costume and more like clothes that your character lives in. Documenting your work is something that I really recommend getting into the habit of. It's great for being able to look back on as a learning resource for yourself. It's also fantastic 3 to 4 years from now, when someone asks you how you made something, you can just give them the exact process if you really like them. There's 100 different ways that people document the process of their projects. I currently use Millernote, but before that I tried OneNote, Obsidian, Evernote, even just a regular sketchbook is obviously a really good one. Some people, I think, Catherine does like video write-up or video sort of explanations of how she makes her items as well. So like there's a few different ways you can do it, but I would recommend doing it. All of them are great ways to do the same thing, which is to get the idea out of your mind and really into just sort of a path forwards. I'm not sponsored by Millernote. I am a huge fan. I am going to plug it for a second because it turned out to be the most useful one for me, and I'm sure it'll do the same to someone else in the room. Millernote is similar to Pinterest in that you can create boards, but you can also create notes and arrows and task lists and boards within boards. It's basically drag and drop wherever you want to put anything. And there's not really any layers to how many like boards you can do within boards. So you could have like a board for, your character, and then you could have another board for accessories. You could have another board within that's your research. Like there's not really any limit. You can also send a link to others. So it can also act like a visual group chat, and anyone with the link can view or edit it. If your family group is super tech savvy, that would be a really cool way to make creative plans, not on Facebook. If you are planning on doing a character that is linked to someone else's, you could share a Milanote board to work on that together and kind of develop ideas. They have templates you can follow for fashion design projects, DIY project planners, or character profiles. Or if you can just make your own like I do, because nobody understands my brain like I do. It's free to use. You can refer friends for more storage if you do manage to reach the free limit, but I would be surprised if you manage to do that with just the one project. This is just an example of a Milanote board that I made for a uni assignment. I really like that I can kind of look back on it and see my thought process as I developed ideas while I filled it out. It's just a really awesome platform, and it's just to make sense of a million different umbrella things and connect them all sort of all in one place. So I would have gotten you to put your hand up to say if you'd come to the character workshop. If you haven't, or you didn't watch the character workshop video that is on the YouTube channel before this video, I would say pause this one, go and watch it and come back. Because one of the best parts about designing your costume for the Hoedown is that we've actually given you everything you might need to know about where your hobbit might live and what they would have access to. So it's really hard to get wrong. For example, I play Maisie Tallows, and the Tallows all live in burrows underneath oak trees. I absolutely have oak leaves and acorns embroidered on my kit, so it makes sense. However, maybe your character is a Tallows who is well-travelled and fell in love with a wattle flower that only grows in Blossombrooke and has that embroidered somewhere on their costume. That'd be a really great way to incorporate a talking point into your costume that others could see and comment on. And you can lean into that as a character roleplay opportunity to speak to someone that you don't know. Also, I'm pretty sure you're already aware that we are not actually set in the Shire, as we have mentioned many times on our website. Character and function. Having your character already created and the idea of how they might spend their day is a really great first step. But some of you might also prefer to come up with what you yourself might like to wear for 3 days and then build your character around that. My own example is that I was really stuck when I was recreating my character for 2024. I had started learning the fiddle in about June, and so I decided I could really lean into still being really bad at it by making Maisie a professional struggling musician as a trade. That was kind of a big aha moment for me. So how the rest of my costume went together, because I knew I wanted to be able to play an instrument in it, so I couldn't have anything overly restrictive on my arms, especially up around my neck where I might hold the violin. Another example is maybe you are just desperate to make a working wagon with huge vegetables, and maybe you'll spend 4 months and a lot of money doing that, and your character being a farmer is a great excuse for you to explore that outlet. Really, you just want to be making sure that you're ultimately making your weekend enjoyable for yourself, as well as being accurate to a character that you have created. I would recommend before starting to try and link both of those things. Just makes it a little bit easier later on. So research, and where to start. So we've gone over the brief, so let's talk about the research stage, because it's super important and I do actually find it really fun to do. Basically, you're just trying to consume as much as you possibly can about the setting, the period, and start exploring the silhouettes and the patterns. One of the best places that you can start is in the library. I would have said you're in one right now because we did have our actual workshop in the Kathleen Syme Library in Melbourne City. So they have a bunch of little sort of libraries that are connected so they can swap books between them. And all of the actual photos on the slide are books that I found in their online catalogue. So you can generally get a bit of an idea of what they actually have. So if your local library has a website, you're very likely to be able to search on there what they have. And they have really good resources. Like they have even the American Duchess book about 18th century dressmaking is in there. So these books are only sort of $50 minimum to buy, so it's better if you can support your library and save yourself a bit of money that can go into the project. I would also recommend the museum, or really the online museums. If your project is something that you're wanting to reference a particular historical period, I would recommend looking at different museum websites. A lot of the really good international ones have a really good online collection, which has a lot of high quality photos of the different details and descriptions of what fabric type it is, where it came from, who donated it, all of that sort of thing. So I would really recommend looking at the Met and also the Victoria and Albert Museum websites in particular. Have got an awesome range. Pinterest. So if you're not really sure what you're looking for, Pinterest is a very generalized sort of place to start, and you can get an idea of what you're naturally reaching for. You can find some really great images once you realize they have created a feature that turns off AI results in your search results. I would want everyone to reverse Google image search anything that has like a caption with a year or like a period that it's from, because it's almost certainly not right. I would also just suggest dumping anything into a board that looks remotely hobbity that you like the look of, and then actually sorting through it afterwards to reflect on what made you save it. So last year I gave everyone a rundown on 18th century clothing layers, but I have decided against that this year because I feel confident that most of you would already know that the 18th to the 19th centuries are generally the best historical reference for any sort of hobbit or halfling looking kit. Don't panic if you're not across that, because it's pretty much all laid out for you on the resources page of the website. But I'll go into that a little bit more later. I do have some personal recommendations for anyone who does want to do any research on historical fashion. My absolute favorite playlist is called The Ultimate Fashion History on YouTube, that has 255 videos covering every period of European fashion from the prehistoric period right through to the concept of sci-fi in the future. It was put up about 10 years ago by a college professor named Amanda Halley. To be most relevant to your Hoedown project, I would watch the videos from the 18th century through to the end of the 19th century, but I have probably watched the whole thing about 5 times, and the whole thing is a great watch if you're able to just put it on while you're sewing or something like that. Amanda also repeats the same phrase right through it that I put into every single project that I've ever designed for, which is fashion isn't an island, it's a response. So it basically means that there's a reason for everything you wear, from the fabrics and the colours and also the silhouettes. One of the best real life examples of this is the Regency period, which favoured very simple silhouettes with minimal, not fabric, but muted colours. Because it was so soon after some of the most famous class revolutions. So nobody really wanted to be recognized as wealthy for quite a long time. So it became a fashionable thing to do so, or to look more pastoral, I should say. A more Hoedown specific example could be that your character is wearing a backpack that they built from dried branches or a cut up quilt, because that is the sort of thing that they would have access to in the Bark Hollow Warren. Or your character might be wearing a beautiful mustard yellow tailcoat with silk velvet lapels, because he's a real estate mogul in Blossom Brook. It's really great to consider this when you're thinking about your Hobbit costume, because considering the why in design ultimately makes your costume come across with a much more authentic feeling. Continuing on from that, there are also so many history documentaries now on YouTube, including documentaries that are based on occurrences during the period that Hobbit clothes were inspired by, or the period that was happening. All of those occurrences would have influenced why they look like that. So there's also Pinsent Tailoring, who wears historical clothing on a daily basis. He has an incredible understanding and knowledge based on the periods that he wears. He uploads videos deeply explaining the construction of menswear during that time, and it's an extremely helpful resource, especially if you are looking more at masculine silhouettes. I would also generally recommend YouTube searching the name of something like cravat, or any of the words that you might see on the resource page, and follow it with the history of. And generally, you'll just gather a lot of knowledge that you can take with you on the project. It's also just like a fun thing to know as well. Yeah. So picking colours is daunting, but the Hoedown families have different family colours from one another that can get you started in the very least. You don't actually have to wear the family colour, but it does make it a lot easier for the players around you to know sort of who you are in game. In terms of knowing how to decide on what colours to use in your outfit, referring back to the colour wheel is the best way to do it. The most common combination we see is complementary, which is where the two colours are opposite each other on the colour wheel. Think Cinderella, Dolores Abernathy from Westworld, or Princess Fiona. They are all complementary colour schemes. Triadic is a really great one for picking what colours to use for embroidery on your kit. So Woody from Toy Story is a great example of a triadic color scheme on a character. Analogous is where the colors are next to each other on the color wheel. So think Velma from Scooby-Doo. And my personal favorite is monochromatic, which is where the colors in a look are all the same, but they are in different shades. It's especially great if you do have a bit of anxiety about color choices because technically you only have to pick one. In terms of knowing how to use the colors that you've picked, the 60-30-10 theory is pretty self-explanatory. You could use the primary color for the main piece of your outfit, like your skirt or your blouse, your secondary color for the bodice or stays, and the accent color for your accessories or your trim. This theory is really just a guide, but I don't think it's something you need to be married to. Using and understanding color theory was something I really struggled with, so I found that these breakdowns and guidelines did actually really help me. You do not have to follow them. So after deciding how to document your process, then doing a whole lot of research, it's time to get the ideas out of your head and to start molding them. I would usually start by doing a mood board. There's not really any rules for them, which can probably make it a lot harder if you're not used to doing them, but the point is that you're creating a collection of images that invoke a general feeling of your character. The mood board on the screen is one that I threw together for my character Maisie Tellers. There's a visual overview of what she's about, but not necessarily costume inspiration in fine detail. That kind of comes later. I usually end up making a few of these as I sort of get to know the character. I might start with like a general one to sort of make sense of my ideas, and then I might do another one that's a little bit more refined. They're not essential, but if you're at all stumped on where to start, I usually find them a really helpful practice as a starting point for yourself, at least while you're getting to know the character that you're trying to convey. So now comes the part of the process where you'll be creating a visual of what you want your hobbit to wear. This can be nearly impossible if you approach it like it is set in stone. Think of the final concept as an example that you could hand to someone who asks you what you're making rather than a contract. One of the ways that I do this is I will find a croquis, which is basically a line work of a body, and I'll trace it 4 times side by side on a large piece of paper and just draw as many looks as I can think of that I'm keeping the research in mind while I'm doing that. It doesn't matter if they aren't great or aren't physically possible, because after the exercise you'll have 4 different designs that you can pick and choose your favorite parts from. Or you might just have 4 very similar looks and you kind of get an idea of what your heart wants to make as well. So this is actually when I got Mary to get up and have a chat to everyone. So Mary is one of our Fair Meadows family heads for this year. She's an exceptionally talented seamstress and a generally impressive human being. She does do a lot of crochet and everything as well. I know she works at the ballet. I think she's been trained in visual arts, I believe. Hopefully that is true. I'm sorry, Mary. But she did get up and have a chat to us about how to style yourself to appear as though you could be a 4-foot size halfling, even though you are in fact a human. So she spoke about the proportions, and this was, I think, a lot of people took a lot away from this because I know I hadn't really thought about it, but your different proportions to make yourself look shorter than you are. A lot of people make things where we might naturally have an anchor point, so like your elbow or like your knees. So any sort of mobility articulation joints, you'd generally have like a cuff or something like that. To achieve peak hobbitability, aim for clothing that cuts off midway between those articulation points. So sort of mid forearm, or like maybe just bring your sleeve up a little bit rather than at the elbow, to make yourself look a little bit shorter than you actually are. She also spoke to us about lines and how they can anchor your eye to a different direction. So the slide very much describes what I'm trying to. Basically how you layer your clothing. If you've got a lot of straight lines or skirts that are laid on top of each other and are horizontal, you might look wider. Or, if they're vertical, you might look taller. So, things like that. Then Mary spoke about scale, and that was things like using big things. So you're a small guy. So if your cardigan has buttons on it, maybe the buttons are big because you're small. If you've just bought a standard button, but you're actually 4 foot tall, your button's going to look larger than it would in the hands of someone who is 6 foot tall. So bigger buttons, and then using thicker embroidery threads, or maybe swapping that out for a yarn, I believe she suggested. And yeah, using sort of chunkier patterns as well, rather than really small patterns, because you'll look, I guess, stouter. And also, how do I know what will look good if I'm not used to styling? She said that you already do. You naturally get dressed in the morning and you put on something and you look in the mirror and you think that's good. That looks good. You can't get it wrong, really, if you're happy in it, because that's ultimately what you should be trying to do. So it's not about being a fashion parade. It's about having a good weekend. So in terms of styling, that really kind of comes down to you. But those are the different tips that you can consider if you do want to make yourself look a little bit smaller than or I guess shorter than your current self. So I did my best to paraphrase what Mary said. She delivered it so much better than I did. But hopefully you can take that information away and use it as you would have if you'd been able to attend the workshop. So thank you, Mary. Now we're going to continue on with the next step in the design process. So you understand the brief and you've done your research, and finally you've got a final concept, and you're ready to get stuck into making your costume. Except not quite yet. You need to make your plan of attack and do some technical research or planning, which is actually very important, almost as much as the research plan, if not more, actually. So where do I get my patterns? Commercial patterns are probably a 5 to 10 minute drive from your house at all times, unless you live somewhere extremely remote. Spotlight and Lincraft for at least a while longer. Generally stock the main ones that are Simplicity, McCall's, Berta, Butterick. They've all got a costume section in the back. They're excellent for first timers. Generally, they have very clear instructions and big enough brands that there aren't very many mistakes. I haven't found many. They get tested quite a lot before they go into print, so they're pretty reliable. If you are feeling brave and do want to venture into the world of historical reproduction, I would really recommend Laughing Moon Mercantile. They have a lot of different eras and also a lot of both women's and men's patterns. They have the best front fall trouser pattern that I have ever used. I know Hayden's borrowed it about 5 times. I think he said 6 in the workshop, might be 6 times. I also made Markus's pants in the slide as well. So Truly Victorian and Black Snail patterns are also both wonderful options. Truly Victorian tends to have mostly feminine patterns, while Black Snail patterns has a bit of both, but both of them generally only have about the 1860s onwards. So they're really good for menswear and your waistcoats and things like that. But you might not find specifically what you're looking for if you're doing more of a femme sort of Hobbit look. Red threaded doesn't have a lot of outer clothing patterns, but it does have some incredible corsetry patterns. This is the photo in the bottom right. Destiny did not make her stays from them. It was actually a Butterick pattern. So disregard that. All of these companies that I have mentioned will generally send you a file to download after purchasing. You can also get those printed off in A1 size, one or the other. So you don't have to spend 4 hours sticky taping the A4 sheets together. So it's worth the money, I promise you. What about making my own? If you've ever altered a commercial pattern, I feel pretty confident that you could also draft your own pattern. There are 2 main ways that I have experience in it. The first is draping on a mannequin. Ideally, you would have a drafting mannequin, but you could always make your own. You basically mark out what you would like your garment to look like on that mannequin, and then pin calico to those shapes to transfer the pattern into shapes that then you can cut out in your main fabric. You can find really good and articulate YouTube videos on how to do that properly. It's not my favorite method. It's excellent if you are making corsets or if you just refuse to do any maths. The second is my go-to, which is flat drafting. You take measurements and create shapes on paper that become the pattern, which sounds daunting, but it's really just like following a recipe. I learned with these books by Winifred Aldrich, both universities that I went to for fashion and costume that are completely unrelated. Both of them taught us with these books. So there are probably others, but I don't know what they are. She's basically compiled these pattern making recipes into what are called pattern blocks or slopers. And then once you've got the pattern block or sloper in the size that you've made, then you're able to adjust the pattern blocks into actual sewing patterns. There's also this book called Stays and Corsets, which does the same thing, but for drafting historical stays and corsets. It also explains the construction methods for each style as well, but Catherine does also go more into the corsetry than this book will. So we'll listen a little bit more and you'll get a little bit more information about corsetry. So just for the sake of time, I won't go more into this today, but you can obviously always message me or Mary or Catherine or any of the people in the family groups for more information about sort of that side of it. I think there's a pattern maker or someone who's very skilled at it in every family group. So you should be able to reach out and find someone who can give you a bit more help if you have any questions about pattern making. What do I make them with? For a Hobbit costume, natural fabrics will always be the best choice. Linen, silk, cotton, and wool, just to name a few, are all considered to be 18th century period accurate, as they are all fibres that existed pre-industrialization. That means that your Hobbit probably would have had access to these materials, whether it was from producing or from trading. Natural fabrics are also much easier to dye, to tea stain, and are just longer lasting. They can be more expensive than polyester alternatives. If you are on a budget, it would be worth making sure that at least the fabrics that are touching your skin are 100% natural fibers, as they are more breathable and more pleasant to wear. It takes a lot of time to construct clothing, and to spend hours making something in the wrong fabric only for it to not function properly because of that choice is devastating. This is just a very vague and generalized guide for you that I'm not going to read out loud, but you can obviously pause this and read it properly. There's also an extra tip. On the back of every single pattern you ever buy, there will also be a little chart that recommends what you should be making that garment out of. You can also think about your actual clothes and what they are made out of. So, shirts and what sort of things that pants are made out of. You can use that as a real guide as well. So if you're watching this after the workshop, I would suspect that possibly you aren't from Melbourne, but you might find this interesting regardless. We are really lucky here in Melbourne to have the fabric shops that we do. I really wanted to show you guys some alternatives to Spotlight or Lincraft to get some really unique stuff to make things with. Darn Cheap Fabrics in Glen Huntly is probably my absolute favourite. They constantly have new stuff and it's always reasonably priced. They still have buttons in the tubes, so you don't have to buy a pack of 8 when you only need 5. And they also just have non-birch range trims and notions, so everything is really unique compared to what you would see at Spotlight, for example. They do have an online store as well, so it is a bit tricky to get to even in Melbourne unless you have a car, so or if you just live in the inner north. So there is an online store. Rathdown Fabrics in Brunswick has some really good options. Their linen is especially beautiful, and they have a lot of dead stock from designers that you can rifle through for pretty good prices. They also sell a lot of trims and notions. They do have an online store, but not everything is on there, so I would look at it. But if you are wanting something quite specific, it's probably better to go in. Jimmy Buttons in Fitzroy is a little bit like dealing with a wizard merchant in Dungeons and Dragons. It's not for fabric, but more for notions and trims. The front door is very unassuming. It's kind of like up a back alley or in like a garage looking thing, and it's just got buttons on the door and it just looks unwelcoming. But behind it is just piles and piles of trims and containers of pom-poms just on the ground, or like boning is just around. I would suggest bringing cash, and unfortunately, they do not have a online store. But if you are in Melbourne, I would definitely suggest going there for anything that's a trim or a button or a notion. Um, Frankie Stewart in Hawthorn is more for bridal wear, technically, but they have the most amazing selection of silk and satin and trims. Their trims are really cool as well. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have many photos, neither does the internet. They have a very strong and firm belief in physically shopping for fabric, so they don't have an online shop or much of a website. I would highly recommend giving them a visit if you are making any sort of party dress or fancy waistcoat for the dance, because their stuff is just beautiful and it's in colours that are really hard to find. Their silk dupion is probably the cheapest that I've been able to find regularly stocked, or best value, I should say. Anywhere else I've looked has kind of been about $40 more a meter, so it's really good pricing and awesome color selection as well. I'll breeze through a couple more. Drapers and the fabric store in Fitzroy are pretty much across each other from on the road. They both offer beautiful quality linens and wools. They do seem to have more dead stock, so it'll usually be sort of one roll of each fabric, maybe two, and they can't really be restocked. So I would probably, if you see it there and you like it, I'd probably buy it. They both have online shops as well, so you can also order from them online. I don't think everything is on there, but they have quite a good selection online. Lastly, I will mention the Fabric Crawl up Sydney Road in Brunswick, which features unique fabrics and Anne's discount fabrics. You have any chance of finding anything in there. It's always different every single time. It's just always worth having a look. So if you do venture into the inner north, I would suggest just popping in and having a look. So then I actually got Catherine to get up and have a chat to everyone about two things: her corsetry, she's incredibly skilled at, and also her knitting as well. So she does a lot of knitting and weaving, I believe. So I got her to have a chat about both of those things. I'll do my best to, again, paraphrase what she said on the day, going from her slides. So she did do some examples, and she held up some that she'd made of the different corsets that she'd done that are in different styles. She did explain that the stays were generally more of a conical shape, whereas your 1860s onwards corsets were more of like a curve sort of shape. There's also the example of, I think it's the 1880s ones there. She was saying that most of the corsets were actually quite short and they would sort of stop around the nipple point, and then the chemises were actually doing a lot of the hard work up top. There's also a picture of the Avenianus corset that she'd made on the right-hand side, so that modern-looking one. Just as another example that you can get that conical shape without sort of the same amount of boning that is in the stays. So it really depends on what sort of shape you're going for as to what corset or stays look or pattern you might make. She also suggested scroop patterns, and then also I think she mentioned jumps as well as like a nice softer bodice option as well. And piprec patterns is the one she made on the right-hand side. So the one she brought in is the one that she was wearing in that photo, and it's where the skirt is also attached, which looked really, really cool. So that could be another really cool way to add a layer as well. Then she also... she was very modest about this, but she does also run corset making workshops, and I know they're very highly regarded. Even some of the students in my uni course actually mentioned Catherine's name to me. So she does these awesome workshops. I think she's got one in October, just before the event, mind you. And also she herself did a Vanianus corset making course as well that she said was very, very detailed, and it wasn't just a couple of videos. It was quite in depth, and there was a lot of back and forth as well. She's also very kindly given some corsetry supply stores that you can look at if you are thinking about buying any boning or busks or anything that might be a little bit, less easy to find at Spotlight. She did say that the UK-based one in particular had the most range, but obviously is international, so the shipping charges would be more. And then she went on to talk about her knitting. So she actually, I think Aiden was there on the day, and he was wearing that wonderful vest that she'd knitted with the gold buttons that is in that photo. And she'd brought up held up some arm warmers and things as well. So she did explain that Ravelry is kind of her go-to for patterns, and you can go down to your local store and rifle through what they've got as well. But Ravelry is very versatile. I think Mary mentioned that there was also a filter. So if you have a particular yarn that you want to use, you can filter the patterns based on the yarn size that you're using, and also adjust the sizing really easily as well. So yeah, she suggested those would be, Ravelry would be a great first stop as well. So hopefully I covered most of that. But Catherine is also known as Crystal Pegasus Costumes on Instagram. She's a wealth of knowledge. So if you do have any questions about corsetry, knitting, really any sewing, she's extremely clever. I would also suggest definitely giving her a message as well. So thank you, Catherine. You have done your research and designing and planning, and this time you're actually at the point where you can sit down and start making your costume, which is very exciting. The next little bit will be brief because unfortunately I can't teach you how to sew in a PowerPoint presentation, but I will give you some pointers that I wish someone had told me when I started sewing that would have saved me a lot of tears. Mock-ups. You should be doing mock-ups. Every single time you make anything with a pattern or out of cloth, you should be doing a mock-up. They are basically a test run of sewing a garment in calico or a cheap fabric that has a similar weight or drape to your final fabric, so you can adjust any fitting issues before you make it in your final fabric. If you do want to get better at sewing, this is really just the perfect way to do that. You can make such a small change and it will greatly impact your sewing. It's also great because once you do fix any fitting issues the first time around and match those adjustments on your pattern, the next time you reach to make that pattern, you don't have to do a mock-up because you've already done it and you know it fits. There's nothing worse than making something, finishing it, trying it on after maybe 12 hours of sewing, and it's too small and you can't fix it. So I would definitely recommend a mock-up. Work plans and checklists. So such a massive aspect of costume is just time management. If you are squeezing this hobby into a very full schedule of work, social commitments, or other hobbies, you really want to set yourself up for success. Once I started creating work plans and checklists for my projects that I could check off and keep myself on track with, I found that I stopped straying from the plan or falling out of motivation halfway through. It's also really helpful for when you start to get into that crunch mode time and it's 2 weeks before the event and things are falling off the wagon. You can really just look at the entire to-do list and know what can kind of be cut away or put away till next year, really. It's also just the best feeling in the world to finish your to-do list or to cross off the last one. It's just highly recommend doing that for every project. So these are just some construction tips that might really help with troubleshooting your sewing. When was the last time you changed your sewing needle in your machine? If you're having any issues with your machine, especially with the stitch quality, this is almost certainly what the problem is. You might be using the wrong needle. There's a needle for every type of fabric. A universal needle is a lie. It's not universal. But you should be changing it. You know, if you're sewing for 4 or 5 hours straight, that needle is making a million different tiny holes in every single piece of fabric. That will get blunt very quickly. So you need to be changing that pretty regularly. Iron as you go. You've probably heard this before, and I do want you to think of me disapproving when you choose not to iron your clothes or your seams before you sew another seam, but your clothes as well, I guess. Hand sewing is not the enemy. When I first started, I really thought that everything had to be done on the sewing machine, every single thing. And it's just not true. I think the higher quality garments are hand finished because they just look better. A blind hem stitch by hand is invisible. It looks beautiful. You should be hand finishing as much as you can, especially once I started hand finishing hems and binding. That's just my standard now. I try not to do any of that on the machine because it just looks better, especially bias binding. Especially bias binding. Pre-washing your fabric. If you're not used to sewing, you might not realize that you need to pre-wash your fabric. So that means just putting in the washing machine, even a hot machine wash, just because it shrinks it before you sew with it, so that if you accidentally hot wash it after you've made it, it doesn't fit weird because it's shrunk. A lot of the fast fashion that you can buy, if you've ever bought something that looked really good in the change room and then you've gotten home, worn it twice, whatever, washed it, and then it just sits weird, or it's just not the same. That is why. It's because fast fashion they don't pre-wash fabric. They save a lot of money by not doing that. But yeah, it just makes it a cheaper garment. So yeah, always make sure you pre-wash your fabric. Switching to a Teflon foot on your sewing machine. I use one as a regular machine foot now because it basically just glides over the fabric without sticking, especially if you're working with like a leather or like a vinyl. If you're sewing something quite lightweight or delicate, like a silk, putting tissue paper on top and stitching over that instead works perfectly, and you can just tear it off afterwards. The feed dogs on your machine can also cause a lot of damage to your sort of delicate fashion fabrics on your corset. So if you're making something out of silk, you might not want to face that down so you can sew on top of the drill or the coutil. You might want to have some tissue paper on top so then your feed dogs are on the sturdier fabric, and then you've got something between your foot and the actual fabric. So I think that's all of my construction tips, but I hope they help. So then I got Markus to get up and actually have a chat to us about his leatherwork because he's a very good leather worker. He very modestly said he's only been doing it for 10 years, which in my mind is, a lot of time. But he's very skilled, and you can see in the pictures of what he's made, that is true. Basically, he went through the different things you can kind of make with leather. Obviously, as exampled in those photos, like he made me a cup holder for my belt and a skirt holster as well, as you can see in the bottom photo there. That can be a really great way to add a layer to your kit. Suspenders, like leather suspenders as well, can look really cool. He's a big fan of those on his Fig Tallows kit. He also went through sort of the materials you might want to start leatherworking with. So things like a pricking iron, which is used to sort of hammer holes into the vegetarian leather so that you can stitch through it, rather than trying to pierce the leather each time with the needle. You can pre-cut a hole. Huge, massive difference. An edge beveler kind of makes the edge of the leather nice and, well, not smooth, but kind of puts a bit of an edge on it, obviously. We also use these when we did our Autumn Glade Elven looking kit as like a way to spoon out some extra leather. I guess like making a design with it. They're really versatile tools, basically. A metal ruler is really important. You can't really get away with a plastic one. The metal ones are definitely the way to go. An edge slicker is really what you use for finishing the edges. It's kind of, as he described, hemming a skirt, but it's a belt. So if you see an unfinished edge on leather, it's very obvious. So you really just use a bit of beeswax and rub it along the edge, and then use that tool to really just kind of smooth it down, and it just gives it a really beautiful finish. A scalpel is really important. You can use a swivel knife as well, but scalp is, I'm pretty sure he swears by the scalpel. So I think either are fine as long as you're very careful. Wax thread and needle, you can't really use this like a regular sewing needle kit or sewing thread. It just doesn't work very well. So a wax thread or a leather needle is really important. Especially when you're doing like your saddle stitching, which is really how you construct anything with leather. that's really that it's the thread is strong enough to be able to do that. And then he also went into the types of dye and stain that you use. Leather is so easy to stain. Normally when you go sew it, when you sew, you would go and buy a fabric in the color that you want. You could dye it; it's a lot of work, but that's why you would normally just go and buy it in the color that you want it. Whereas with leather, you would normally get your veg tan, which is obviously a neutral color, as in the photo, and you can just dye or stain it with like that little cotton bud thing, and it just takes it so easily. It's really hard to get it wrong. There's a lot of different ways you can use the dye as well. We did our autumn leaves for our autumn glade kit, which I think there's a photo of it in that previous slide. If not, I'll put one in there right now, where we sort of painted each leaf with different shades of dye, and it looked beautiful. So it had a gradient. So you can do things like that with any leather work that you do. He also suggested I think I can't remember who asked, someone asked what sort of weight that you might go and buy for a veg tan, and it would probably be about a 1 to 2 millimeter thick veg tan is probably what you need. It's not a lot of things that require thicker than that unless you're making a saddle. But usually a belts are sort of between 1 to 2 millimeters thick. And with your veg tan, it's almost like fabric shopping, where you really should be going to physically buy it, because every hide is different. It's not a mass manufactured thing. It's a hide. So it once belonged to an animal, and they're all very different. So you should be going to physically buy them. And I know Leffler's in Melbourne is fantastic. I think there's Candy Leather in Sydney or New South Wales somewhere as well. Might be Queensland. Forgive me. But those are really great places to go and look at. And I'm pretty confident they're quite ethical as well, whereas some of the ones you might buy or import from overseas and things like that, you never know sort of the quality of the hide and also the treatment of the animal. So it's good to keep those things in mind as well. Yes. So Markus did a really good job of describing all of that on the day. Hopefully this was okay. But again, I think his Instagram is Crumpet King, and he's also in the Talos family group or on the Hobbits Hoedown family group. So you can always reach out to Markus. And I think there was a few other people also very excited about the leather making, and they also do the leather working. So there's probably someone in every family group that can help you as well. So always post in your family groups and just see if there's anyone that can give you a hand if you have any questions, or if you're trying to tackle a particular project, because there's probably going to be someone in there. Okay, so we are finally up to the final stage of making our costumes, which is the finishing touches. This is what takes your outfit from a costume into authentic clothing that your character has been wearing for years. I believe Pat made a comment actually about how, even though you might have watched this entire video and thought, oh my god, I don't really want to sew, actually I'm not really that interested in sewing, that's fine. You can upcycle. You can go and thrift something and then upcycle it to make it look more in character. So if you've bought items to wear, this is where you can really kind of make them come to life, and it doesn't look like something you've just thrifted. It's, maybe you swap out the buttons on your pants for something wooden. Maybe you add some more buttons so you can actually add suspenders to your pants. You could add patches to the knees. You could add a bit of grime to the legs. Maybe your character's sort of done some gardening and then wiped his hands on his legs. Elbow patches is another way to make a modern looking jacket look a little bit more rustic as well. You can also do like blanket stitching and things like that to the edges, or, add a binding, or, even do some embroidery on it as well. Like, you can go and thrift something, but you should definitely think about the different ways you can make it look really unique, or even just, more relevant to your Hobbit. So they didn't go out and buy it. They might have been given it by someone and it's got a lot of mismatching buttons, or maybe they've done a bunch of sort of patches or, I guess maintenance on it over the years, or, it's a good thing to think about as well. So through upcycling what you've thrifted is a really, really good idea if you don't want to sew, because you don't have to do that. Accessories and props are a really fun way to incorporate more personality into your costume while also having practical benefits as well. LARPing becomes a lot easier for everyone if they can figure out sort of what you are or what you're about from 3 meters away. So, sun safety is really hobbity. I cannot stress enough how much I need you to be wearing a form of hat to protect yourself from the sun, because we really do get every sort of type of weather every single year, unfortunately. We might get rain, we might get hail, we might get a scorching heat wave. So you need to have a hat of some variety. You could use a parasol if you wanted. I know straw hats are so common at the op shop, and you can even turn one into a bonnet as well. Aprons and cravats add an extra layer and a pop of colour, and maybe yours is embroidered with your initials or your favourite fruit. You could also make yourself maybe a beautiful reticule purse to take with you to the dance instead of a straw basket that maybe you only use during the daytime. Footwear. Please wear shoes. We live in Australia, and we have snakes and bindies and spiders and all sorts of things that love your bare feet. You could wear ballet flats or sandals if you really wanted to, but I would really recommend opting for like a boot or something with a bit of gumption, because you're going to be walking quite a lot. It's still a large site. It's not super hilly, but there is a small, I guess, incline. You want to be comfortable and you want to be wearing enclosed shoes, because I do not want to be helping you with a snake bite. Art finishing is something that has happened to every single costume that you see on screen, whether it is throwing it in the washing machine a few times, dunking a white t-shirt in a vat of tea for 30 seconds, or airbrushing it. I promise you that the costume department have done something to it so the character doesn't look like they've just bought a brand new wardrobe. You could apply art finishing to your Hobbit costume by tea staining any white fabric, even if it's printed, just for a couple of minutes. So it just takes the sheen off it. I'd suggest doing this at a bare minimum. You can also do this to trim and lace. Even that really cheap nylon lace takes tea really well as well, actually, surprisingly. I would suggest doing a few samples if you can, and testing out the different tea types and coffee, because each brand will turn out completely differently from one another. You could also do things like sandpaper the legs of your trousers or on the knees or the cuffs to give them a bit of texture as though you've worked in them a few times and maybe they've been snagged on branches or something. So then I got Murnong to get up and have a chat to everyone. Murnong is the backbone of our prep team, I would say, one of the pillars, and he's an incredible woodworker. So he got up and had a bit of a chat about all of the various things he has used that woodworking for in terms of his costume and accessories, and then really just the different ways that he made those woodworked items look in character. So you can probably see on that example there the letterbox he made for us in our post house. That was once pine, and then I know he took a bit of a flamethrower to it. He used a router, and also I think it was a angle grinder was the other one, was one of his favorite tools, to sort of cut off various edges to make it look like it had been whittled away at. Which was very clever as well. So the flame throwing, or flaming, I should say, is also how he makes a lot of the wood look quite old and ancient. It's a really good way of weathering it really fast, so you don't have to go and sit it out in the sun or in the rain where it can warp. So just giving it a bit of a flame to make it dark looks really good, and then doing a bit of a stain on it afterwards. He's done a bit of pyrography, I think it's called, where with the wood burning, which you can see in that sort of top right photo as well. So you can do that to anything. So if you have any sort of wooden accessories, or a mug maybe, or even a backpack or something, you can, also do that beautiful pyrography and do some detailing on that as well. I know a few people walk around with those wooden chests, or I guess like wooden bags, or briefcases almost. And you could decorate that as well to give it a little bit more life. Um, the mugs and the pipes, I think, are a Murnong icon. So he makes those pipes and the cups himself. I think he also does commissions as well if you're interested in just having someone else make it for you. But it's a really cool technique. And I think the photo of the one that's got the little beehive on it, that was a resin casted beehive that he then put on the mug, and then he did a lot of weathering to it with the paint, and then sealed it all in. So yeah, he's a really good. Probably he described this a lot better than I did, but he's again a very good wealth of knowledge about woodwork, and more than happy to answer any questions you might have about how you might tackle a particular project. If you have any sort of wooden accessories that you're thinking about making. So Hobbit ears are a really great touch to your kit. There's a lot of different suppliers out there. One that we are very excited to collaborate with are called Felly Faye. Felly Faye was launched in 2022 by Felicity and her partner in Sydney. She specializes in everything from ears to tails to horns. They also offer pretty much any color that you might want for your ears to be, and that's just a request when you order. So they're quite inclusive in that sense. We do have a 10% discount code as of July 2026. So if you give it a go, if you're watching it quite a while away from now, but it's HH down 10. And if you do use it, please make sure you post and share Felly Faye's name, because they are wonderful and they really deserve that exposure. So it also is our way of saying thank you for the code. So yeah, please make sure you do plug them if you do use that code. If you are someone who has a latex allergy, I would suggest looking into Madhouse FX for their silicone ear options. In terms of glue, Prozaid, I find, doesn't cause much damage to the latex ears. You can also use eyelash glue as well, but if you do have that latex allergy, you might want to opt for spirit gum instead, because I think that, yeah, the Prozaid and lash glue has latex in it. Don't leave them on the dashboard of your car in summer, because they will become a very expensive gelatinous paste. So I have made us a new website. So you might have visited it. Before it was updated. It did take me a few months to do it, so please go and use it. I do check. If you haven't been on the old one either, do make sure you go and look, because it has got pretty much everything you need to know about our actual event site. The schedule, the event map I made is also on there. You can also download the food showcase entry form. All of it is on there, so you should make sure you go and have a look. I've also added a ton of new player resources as well, especially costume related. We've got links to accent tutorials, bonnet making tutorials, everything you might possibly need is on that resource page. If you also go through it and there isn't something you feel like should be on there, you can also leave a little bit of a feedback form submission as well, so I can see that and add it. If you haven't been on the website in a little while, or seen it since it went live this week, make sure you go and resubscribe, because unfortunately our subscription list did not go across in the transfer. It's one of the only things that didn't. So if you do want to come to our 2027 event, I would really recommend subscribing to that website, because otherwise you will have no idea when the tickets go on sale. I also did want to remind everyone that we have a YouTube channel, which you're probably watching this on. And we have our previous workshops on there, like the town hall and the character workshop. And we've also got playlists as well. So there's some playlists of things that we've sort of picked out that we thought you might make use of. So you should have a look at that. Family heads. So a few of them would have spoken to you today. But our family heads are wonderfully talented and very wise people. They've been in the Hoedown community for a little while, which is why they are family heads. They have literally put their hands up to be the person who answers questions. So if you have any questions at all, it doesn't matter how silly you think it is, you should reach out in the family groups because they'll be more than happy to answer. But also, someone else might also be wondering the same thing and might want to see the response. You can also post in your family groups, and there's links to those now on the 2026 event page. Every time we see you guys using those groups, it removes any of our fears that the event selling out is a joke and nobody is actually going to turn up. You can also reach out to Destiny, Hayden, or myself as well because we are also very excited about the Hoedown and are constantly amazed by what you guys might bring along each year. We would love to help you in any way that we know how. And I did want to just quickly remind everyone that a bunch of the libraries in Melbourne have makerspaces. I think some of the various capital cities have these as well, but I'm not sure. You can access incredible pieces of equipment like embroidery machines, 3D printers, dress forms, Dremels, laser cutters. Even if you don't have a sewing machine, they have regular sewing machines that you can use to see if you like doing it. It's all free, so you just have to join your local library, which you'd also need to do if you do borrow any of those books that I mentioned earlier. Um, I would have gotten Pip to raise her hand at this point, who is in the photo that is on the slide. She works at the Makerspace, so she's our Bluffwater family head this year. And she is very, very, very good when it comes to all things library. So if you have any questions about what they might have, or if you want to go and access any of the local makerspaces, she's a really good person to ask as well. So at that point, we had some Q&A questions. I believe one of them was actually how many costumes you should think about bringing to the event, which baffles me. We hadn't thought about putting that anywhere previously. But I think our answer was essentially sort of having 2 base layers at least, because that's what's touching your body, that's what you're sweating on. Gets a bit stinky after a couple of days, and a dance. So I would suggest having at least 2, not costumes, but at least base layers that you can swap, because you don't want to be wearing the same thing for 3 days in a row. It's bad for everyone. So yeah, at least 2 base layers. 3 is exceptional. But as for your outer clothes, as historical fashion worked as well, you didn't really need to change the upper layers too many times. So it would be great if you had 2 costumes and 2 sets of base layers. That's a great goalpost, but if it's your very first event, you might not want to come back next year. I don't know. Just making 2 base layers should be enough for your first event. If you have any other questions as well about costumes or anything, you can also just comment or email us or post in the family groups or in the regular group. There's so many different ways you can contact us. The email is also on the very bottom of the website, or you can enter a submission form through the contact form as well. But I hope you found this workshop very helpful, and unfortunately I couldn't get the speakers to do another recording for you as well so easily, but that's okay. They were fantastic in person. I didn't give them the opportunity so we could get this video up faster, so it's not their fault, it's my fault, but hopefully I did a good enough job trying to rephrase what they said. But again, you've got all of their information and contact details for if you do want to reach out to them with any questions. So yeah, thanks.